Hello, hello, soulful seekers. Welcome back to Trauma and Transcendence. And as you can see today, I am live streaming. My intention today is to hop on and talk about all things mediumship. I've got a couple of questions that some of you had asked, and so I'd like to just have a fun little FAQ all about mediumship today. Before I begin, let me just double check to make sure that I am streaming where I need to be. If you're finding this, you might be on my Facebook profile because Riverside still does not want to acknowledge the fact that I have Facebook pages. I am going to have to sit and actually open up a ticket and get that to work, it looks like. But if you are able to find this and see this, or if you're in the event, there is a link. You can come on in and come and have a chat with me in the studio. And that way I can answer even more of your questions as we're kind of chilling and hanging out here. Give me just a brief moment. I want to share this to the page so that people there can find it also. Because if you're looking for this episode, you're not going to find it on Spotify right this moment. I'm going to have to upload it a little bit later. So that'll probably be available on most of my streaming platforms, most likely tomorrow. But how have you been? What is new and interesting and happening in your life? I would love to hear about it, particularly if you are working through trauma, experiencing transcendence, or experiencing and exploring spiritual awakening. Tell me all about it. Let me know what questions and curiosities you have, because they may be things that I would love to speak on and share, and chances are you're not the only one going through it. And very rarely are we going through things and having challenges all alone. So that would be a neat way to have a fun little dialogue and something to explore. Let's see, what else is coming up? Coming up September 14th from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. is Skunk Fest. If you are interested in skunks, whether you rescue, rehabilitate, or curious about what they're like as pets, or would like to pet a skunk, I had the ability to pet a skunk last time I did the Paw Pet-tacular. They had a tent full of skunks that had been bred as pets, I believe, and they're like descented, deglanded kind of situation, similar to a ferret, but significantly and substantially larger than a ferret. So that was interesting to see. But over at Skunk Fest, I was invited. I still actually have to fill out my table, but the goal for me is to be providing some spiritual sessions. So I'm going to do a little bit of animal Reiki, animal communication, and emotion code for animals. So if you're rescuing, you've got animals that you work with, you love, or you live with, and they're experiencing some challenges, we can actually get to the root of it, doing a little bit of emotion code or straight up animal communication. And with animal communication, it's always a blast because honestly, I never know what they're going to say about their lives, about their wants, their needs, or what they're going to say about you as their owners. But it's always a blast. So at the Paw Pet-tacular, I did some animal readings. One of the readings that I had done, there was a very specific, particular request from an owner's dog. The dog was kind of conveying it would like cucumber and mint in its water 1 to 2 times a week. And that was like a new one for me. It's like, ooh, you must just like have the spirit of like a spa girly to be wanting mint and cucumber in your water. But what the dog was trying to say to me was the mint was going to actually help with teeth and breath, and the cucumber was refreshing, and that it would be settling for the dog's stomach, that apparently the dog had a little bit of nausea. So again, I absolutely never know what these animals are going to say, what they want. What I do know, though, is that owners have validated time and time again when I do these readings that I absolutely am able to capture and express the personality of their pet, whether or not the animal is present. So a pet reading only takes an image to do. I just need a moment to connect, sit with their picture, and get a good kind of grasp of what's happening, what's going on, and how they feel about it. So, Skunk Fest will be a cool opportunity. I'll be in person if you would like to do that. Hopefully, I'll see you there. That is going to be, let's see, South Central Park, and it is North Ridgeville in Ohio. I've never personally been down that way. That'll be a first for me, but perhaps I will see you there. And then, of course, not long after that, we're going to be heading right into Michigan Hypnosis Conference. That's coming up on the 20th. I want to say I'm getting there on the 19th, if not possibly the 20th. Whatever the Thursday is, is when I'm going to be driving in and arriving. I'm going to be speaking about spiritual healing crisis for hypnotherapists, for coaches, wholeness and wellness practitioners who might be experiencing this with their clients. I'm going to help them identify it, how to catch it, know when it's happening, and then give some really good indicators and clues as to how to move forward and some solutions on how you can help your clients through a spiritual healing crisis and what that feels like and how to navigate it. So very much looking forward to that. It's one of my favorite conferences of the year. It is my third year going. It's its third year since its inception. And I look forward to seeing how it's going to continue to grow. But so far, it's a phenomenal community. Not a huge conference, but I feel like that adds a bit of flavor to it because we really get to have deeper, more wholesome connections. There's time to talk to everybody and to actually get to know people a whole lot better. So very much enjoying that aspect and can't wait to get out there and to see what everyone else is going to be bringing to the conference and talking about. But let's hop into it. So today I'd like to do a little bit of an FAQ, bring whatever questions you have about mediumship. I've written down a couple here that were submitted, and let's just kind of define it a little bit. So you can have a little bit of the territory before we begin to navigate it. Now, mediumship, for me, is the ability to communicate with loved ones on the other side. These can be the human types. These can be animals that have passed. And some mediums lump in spirit guides as well. So any of these supports that are no longer physical, that may have been in the past, some guides have not been. So that's something to consider. But a medium can connect and is essentially the bridge between the living and the spirit world. And there are lots of different ways to do that. So my preferred method of mediumship is called evidential mediumship. And in evidential mediumship, we are looking and seeking, prioritizing evidence of proof after life. And so when someone's doing an evidential mediumship reading, you're not going to typically see them pull out additional tools. They won't likely use tarot or oracle. They won't likely be dowsing or doing any of those kinds of things. Now, there are spiritual mediums who are not necessarily evidential. And now, this doesn't mean that they can't bring through evidence. It just means it's maybe less the focus of their reading, and they will use additional tools. I tend to walk in all veils. There are times when I do bring in tools, but primarily I focus on the evidential part because a message coming from a loved one in spirit is going to be more effective, more well-rounded, and received when my sitter, the person receiving the reading, can be clear that yes, this is absolutely their person who's connecting because I've given them coordinates that only their loved one could give. And it can be really hard to receive a message if you're not believing that your loved one is the one coming through. And so the nature of evidential mediumship is that we ask different kinds of questions. We value the life, the experiences, the highs and the lows that the person would have lived through. And so those things will be very, very important. and of value. It does not require a particular faith. It does not require a particular religion, although spiritualists and spiritualism are based on mediumship and evidence of proof after life. So there is a spiritual practice that does have spiritualist churches where they do mediumship as part of the service, as well as sometimes healing mediums can arrive and participate, and so you'll see things like that occur. And to include trance mediums. So a trance medium is someone who, rather than, and there's a lot to explain here. So a trance medium is someone who's more of a physical medium. They will use their body as a tool in a different way to allow for spirit to come in and to connect that way. It is something that I can do, but it's not something I enjoy doing or tend to do very often. Now, I want to create a little bit of separation. A physical medium is different than an emotional medium, a mental medium, and yet a trance medium is primarily physical but can also be a mental and or emotional medium. All this means is that the information comes in on different channels. And that's kind of convoluted and difficult to explain. Let me try to make this clearer. A physical medium is going to be someone who has clairsentience most likely, but also the ability to have clairtangency. They can touch an item and have a sense about it, but also they're more likely to have manifestations happen around them. Spirits can actually use their energy and help have things relocate around the room, have phenomenon happen like ectoplasm. And if you're new, that is a whole other thing, but I basically think of Ghostbusters and Slimer. Thankfully, I have never actually had a full-on experience with ectoplasm myself. But you know what? I will actually, on the podcast coming up next episode, have someone who may have. I'm going to bring in a local medium called Greg Nicholas. If you're in Ohio, you absolutely undoubtedly know who Greg is. He, I feel, is like a state treasure here in Ohio. And if you go anywhere for readings, undoubtedly at some point you've crossed paths with Greg. He goes to many, many shops and gives really beautiful readings, and Greg uses a whole host of tools. I've seen him use cowrie shells, dominoes, oracle decks. I think one has been in his family for several generations, but I'll let him tell you all about it when he visits. So we'll have to ask Greg that question of, have you encountered ectoplasm and what that is like, and what kind of a medium Greg is. So things can also purport, they can move in the presence of a physical medium. And people around the physical medium are kind of helping to bolster their energy, and so we can actually experience other kinds of phenomena like a disembodied voice. That's a lot to take in. I want to say that is mostly people who are very advanced in their mediumships. That is not the norm. That is not the vanilla kind of flavor of it. These are people who've possibly gone to places where these things are practiced, like Camp Chesterfield or Lilydale, or even over in the UK, going to Arthur Findlay, like the big mediumship named schools. I did get to experience some trance mediumship when I took my advanced class with Rita Berkowitz, my time in Boston. So it was great to have the experience, to know that I would be able to do that. And at least with that experience, I knew that it wasn't for me, that I didn't enjoy the sensation and feeling of it. But it's usually kind of interesting. It can be practiced. Usually it's lower light. And sometimes you can see transfiguration, where the person's face actually can take on the characteristics of the spirit coming through. So very, very deeply fascinating. I wouldn't start there, which I seem to have today, but it's not the place I would start. So that's an interesting thing to look at. Now, let's look at A mental medium. A mental medium is someone who's more likely to be clairvoyant, clairaudient, claircognizant. They're more likely to just know things and not understand why, but the data comes through on those three channels primarily, and that's how they're able to receive their messages. So they can see your loved one in spirit, whether they see it in their mind's eye or they see it peripheral or they are lucky enough to get a full-on apparition. Okay, I'm not sure what happened there. I don't know if maybe my connection just let up, but let's give it a chance to try to come back. And hopefully we get to keep the first part of that recording because I just gave you a really good in-depth explanation of what trance and physical mediumship can look like. Not fully on trance, but I was talking about what a mental medium is. And a mental medium is someone who is more likely to process clairvoyantly, clairaudiently, meaning they hear it, or claircognizantly, they just have that knowing. They can't tell you why, but there is a conviction, not an attachment. It's more just like it feels like a fact. They can't explain how they know, they just know. A clairaudient is someone who's going to hear. They'll either hear it in their imagination, kind of like the way it works with mind's eye, or it'll actually be outside of their ear. Or it's like when often little children display this when they think they're being called, they hear someone calling their name, and so they go check with their parent, and it wasn't the parent. That's half of my childhood right there. That happens so many times. Let me just double check to see that you guys are even seeing this. It's very quiet. Well, it says live, so I am going to trust that it is live, and man, I really hope that you got the first part of that video. Because that was good, and if not, hopefully Riverside caught it. I'll be able to upload it and you'll hear it on Spotify later. So, a mental medium is not crazy. They just process things in that level, in that way. Now, an emotional medium, also not crazy, can process things through their clairsentience. It's more of their gut feelings. They may or may not have physical sensations. So a good clairsentient may have impressions on when somebody died, what that felt like. It can be symptoms that they're feeling and having awareness of. It can be the emotions that they were feeling or having go through them. Now, when I do mediumship, it is all above the board. It's all of it. I have physical sensations. I can hold an item, see a picture, and connect with that loved one. I can hear just their full name. Actually, is enough of an energy signature for me to pick up and follow in on. Some mediums don't even need that. Some mediums can connect just with intention, and that is enough for them. For me, names have always been hard, and so for whatever reason, I don't often get names in my mediumship. And then if I can hear the full name, that is enough for me to zero in, kind of like a sniffer dog, like a bloodhound. And then I can actually get a whole lot more information and follow that stream of energy. And I think that's largely because I've started clairsentient, and then I feel like the other abilities came much later. And so it can kind of shift. Many people do start out stronger in one ability, and the more that they work with it, the more they practice, the more the other abilities tend to open up. And so it's not uncommon. Just a moment, I'm texting my spouse to come and get our puppy. So it's not uncommon to start out with one clair ability being stronger than another. And the way that we work with them is actually just use them, practice more, put them to use, have curiosity, question, explore, see what answers come. Now, mediumship, though, is something we really want to practice in a group together in a situation that's going to allow for validation to occur. And that's something that's very tough to do on our own. It's one of those skills that really does work best when we're practicing with other people so that we can learn more about our ability, but also have that in the moment of, oh, you're on to something. Yes, you're picking up on this. Or no, that's a little off. And it's really going to help you kind of fine tune and hone in on that when you've got other people. But also, and we've talked about this briefly before, mediumship is stronger when mediums are together. So the more mediums there are, it's like having a brighter light lit, and it can help each medium kind of work together in that way. My goodness, that pug is going to be the death of me. And my spouse did not get that message, so my apologies if you hear her banging on the door. She's got separation anxiety. It never ends. You think, as an animal communicator, that I could just connect with her? No. I'm so not objective when it comes to my own pets. It is much easier to read a stranger's pets than it is my own because we have our own ideas. And it can be similar with mediumship too, where it's always nice to go and get a reading from another medium and to be supported and to not have my own ego and personality get in the way of whatever messages want to come through. But practice in groups. You're going to get much more out of it. You'll learn from each other, you'll grow together, but then also you can enhance each other and the actual spiritual energy that it takes to do mediumship once you learn how to tap in and work with that in a group is way better. It's a lot more concise, and it's going to tell you where you're off and where you're on and help you identify things when you can't have the objectivity to do it on your own. So those are some of the kind of basics. Now, whether you see a mental medium, an emotional medium, a physical medium, they will guide you on how their ability works and how they respond best. If you're working with a spiritual medium, that will also be different than an evidential medium. Each medium knows their abilities, they know how they function most optimally, and they'll guide you from there. And so it's always good when you're looking for a medium to find someone who understands their ability really well, and so that they can guide you on what they need from you. Ideally, not very much at all. And particularly if they're evidential, they shouldn't be asking you any questions whatsoever. Now, there may be things that they don't understand in the process of doing the reading, and they may say, I don't know what this means. Does this have significance to you? Yes, no, maybe, partial, right? That's what I like to teach my students to do, is to kind of set up a framework in that way. So let's get to the questions here. Number one question, how to tell the difference between info that is right on and something that isn't true. And this is something I would like to say that comes with practice, because all of our abilities come from the same place in the brain, and it's the same place that we have the imagination. It can feel false because it's in that daydreamy-like state. And it's one of those things that you have to really begin to practice and hone in, but also with other people. Because if you're doing it on your own, how are you going to validate the information that comes through? Whereas if you're reading for a stranger and you're just describing what spirit is lending your way, what experiences are coming through, then they're able to say, yes, I recognize that. It doesn't mean that every time you do a reading that your sitter is always going to connect with everything that you say or share, especially if they had distance in the relationship. If this is a loved one coming through that's sharing things and they'd been passed for a very long time, and if your sitter was younger, they may not know or remember certain details. Goodness, I remember a brush up class that I took a little while ago. I want to say about 2.5 years ago, just to kind of reconnect me in. Even though I've been doing this skill for a very long time and teaching, I still like to pop in and take classes as a refresher. I still like to grow and test my ability and meet other people and new kinds of things. And so I'd hopped into a virtual medium who was offering her classes online, and I popped into one of her classes just to practice, to reconnect, to come be in a community. And someone was reading for me, and they were doing a really great job bringing through one of my cousins that had passed. But they said this one thing that I just couldn't place. And the whole thing was me and her being in the back of my aunt or uncle's vehicle. And it was one of those wood panel vehicles. And I had no recollection of that. None whatsoever. In fact, I actually had to ask my aunt and some of my other cousins, "Hey, did you own this vehicle at some point? Were, my cousin and I ever in the back of it?" To which I then got it confirmed. Now, I feel like sometimes spirit does that. One, because they don't know if we will or will not remember something. But two, sometimes I feel like it's intentional. I feel like spirit will do that so that we have to reach out to our other family members to validate things. And one, it feels validating. So then we have more belief and support and comfort from the reading. But two, that also brings our loved ones in to let them know that, a family member that they're connected to came through as well. And that allows for more conversations to happen and to open up. But to actually know if something is valid or not, there are times when I do readings now and I still don't know if something is valid or not. And I've learned to kind of separate my ego from it. It's more, what can we help the client connect with on their own that they have recollection of or that they can find out about? And maybe they can connect to most of it. Maybe there's one or two pieces, like for me, that I couldn't and I needed help with. And maybe, if the person is coming and they're having a reading, they might be expecting to hear from a certain person. If someone else comes through, they may have some bias and they might not be open to hearing from person A because they were hoping for person B. And so that can kind of create it's like a horse with blinders on. They're kind of limited in what they're able to validate and explore because they were hoping for something else entirely. So they're kind of mentally closed off in that moment. And so it's not out of the blue that sometimes I have clients who haven't connected to things and it takes them a minute. They have to go work on life and check in with people. And sometimes I hear back 3, 6 months, a year later, saying, "Oh, I finally get this last piece now. I finally know what this was. So-and-so told me about this, or so-and-so had a picture of this thing." And that happens. And it's just because we're human, we're fallible. And so we don't remember absolutely everything all the time. Even when it's someone that we love and something's passed and they might be pointing out a particular memory or something and we're just distracted. Sometimes it's hard to connect those dots, or it's the way the medium is bringing through the message. They might use different wording for things, particularly if there are different cultures involved, different religious communities of society that they may or may not be familiar with. All of those things can factor in. And so really, I would say practice, just practice with other people, practice in communities. Ideally, if you can get a good mediumship circle going, have the same people show up week after week, you're going to get far better results and learn how to work with each other better. Not so much because you know who you're bringing through. On the contrary, don't share those details ahead of time, trusting that they will come through eventually through someone, and you don't want to have fed the medium and given them that information ahead of time, but rather because you're going to form some trust, you're going to know how to work together, you're going to understand each other's communication better. And so if you are, as a medium, trying to explain what you're experiencing and you're using words that your sitter might not, the sitter might say, "Oh, okay, because I know you use this particular pattern of communicating using different style words, like me being from Montreal, Quebec. There are words that will always give me away. I don't say process, I say process." If we're talking about, like the difference between soda and pop. In Quebec, I probably would have just called it a Coke. I might have meant a variety of different things, but that was how that goes. Or like the TV remote. There were different words for different things. Some people say controller. In Quebec, that was very common. "Pass me the controller." But in the United States, they don't say that. But those things are kind of filters that you go through life with. And so learning to bring messages through beyond the filter is a skill that you have to work on and kind of fine polish. And the best way to do that is to practice, to have a dedicated group that you work with. So that's what I would say. And then also, how to tell if something is true or untrue. Notice your attachment to it. If you have a feeling of needing to be right, That is your ego. And your ego is probably going to lead you astray. So, learning what it feels like to give a good reading, having done enough of them to know, oh, you know what? This is coming through claircognizance. I don't really feel attached to it, but it feels factual. And to understand what that feeling feels like for you is going to go a long way. And then also just working with your abilities, knowing them well enough, being able to speak to them. And there is always an element of trust in mediumship. When we do this, it's a co-creation. We're not doing it all on our own, and that's an important thing to remember too. Next question, and this is somebody that I trained for a minute. They came to one of my practice circles, and they hadn't experienced mediumship before, and so within an hour, I had essentially trained them in a process that I enjoy. And they've asked, do you have to say the entire spiel at the beginning of a reading, like calling in ancestors, ascended masters, angels, for it to be an accurate reading? No, you don't. But I do. Every time I give a reading, I will say archangels, angels, ascended masters, benevolent loved ones in spirit, ancestors, please help me to do my highest and best today for the sake of myself and the sake of my client, those with and around them, and so it is. And I say that because, one, it is part of my personalized ritual for how I do this work. It helps me to manage my vibration. It helps me to set my intention and to clear away any lesser, lower frequency vibrational things which can disrupt your reading. And so that's my own way, but you can find your own, which I had told you on that day. Then we trained together to find your own ways of doing things. And that's just the way that I like to. And it hasn't failed me yet. It hasn't done me wrong at any point. But I feel something that makes a really good, strong mediumship reading is having a beginning, a middle, and an end, having a format and a structure that you can follow through. One, because it's going to create a beautiful habitual method of doing things for you. It's going to make things clearer for your sitter, but also you're going to have the neurological pathways creating in your brain. And that's important because you want to get yourself into that state steadily and reliably very often. And so that is part of that for me. And when I do that, I find that because I've raised vibration, I've set my intention, I've made things clear for myself, for the sitter, that opens the door for spirit. It gets me right where I need to be to have a high quality reading. So to answer your question, no, you don't have to. You can make it your own, find your own process, but remember the 3 C's that I had shared from one of my favorite teachers, Patricia Price, and that was clear, center, and climb. You should know what those are, and if you don't, then we should speak. Next part of their question, what is the importance of that as a channeler? I would say that as a channeler, you still want to raise vibration and to clear your channel. You still want to have powerful intention. You still want to have rituals and habits and practices that get you to be in the right state of mind, spirit, and heart before you do the work. For me, it just clears away the lower energy frequencies. It helps me drop and be very, very present. So whether you're doing a mediumship reading or you are channeling, I feel like both of those are important. They're important steps to have. But you're going to learn your own ways. So find what works for you and don't be afraid to practice, but do so mindfully. Be aware of your practices. Next, you said also, did your clair senses change or become stronger or weaker than others at times? Yes. Yes, they did. I would say that from early childhood until probably mid to late 20s, clairsentience was my primary clair that I received, and that was the most open. It was the one that I used to guide me through life and that I trusted the most. As I relied on it, as I worked with it, as I continued, what I found was the other ones began to kind of chime in and to strengthen and to grow. And so the more that I could be aware of when clairsentience was happening. I could be in that state a little bit longer and manage it. And then I could ask more questions. I could get a little more curious. I could be more mindful to pay attention to the other clairs. And then as I practiced and worked on the others, they began to strengthen. And after I did Reiki, that Reiki attunement, I must have been, I'm going to say about 27 or 28 years old. And that's when everything kind of got a whole lot stronger. One, because I guess it counts as a near-death experience. When I had my gallbladder out, it was a rough trip, and I had a rough way coming back. And I definitely wasn't the same after that. I'm never going to forget that. At some point, I will actually need to see a fellow hypnotist and be like, hey, let's go explore this, because I feel like there are things I need to look at there. But definitely, my call to spirituality got a whole lot louder after that. And I was kind of researched to come back and to explore it again. And then also after Reiki, things changed too. So I became just more plugged in, more aware of everything, and everything got a whole lot louder, but also in a way where I could identify it better. My mediumship enhanced a whole lot more after Reiki as well. And then Reiki is wonderful with mediumship because then it lends itself to helping you clear spaces, clear homes. I would say clear people, but now that I'm doing spirit releasement, I know that it's not always effective for that as much as we'd like it to be. But it definitely can help you get into the right mind state for mediumship and channeling and other abilities. So I often recommend taking Reiki if you are working on intuition and if you are working on your mediumship or psychic abilities. My guest next week, Greg, will also tell you a little bit about Reiki because he's a Reiki practitioner too. And so it really does kind of lend us to open those channels a whole lot more greatly, I find. But as I worked with my abilities, the more I did things like Reiki, the more I was able to be more mindful of things as they were happening. And so because I already understood the clairsentience and how to work with it, I was less opposed to or shocked by the clairvoyance or the clairaudience as they came in. And I was able to identify them a little better and sooner, which helped. And the other thing was, when I did get really sick with the whole gallbladder thing, when we're in moments of sickness or not doing well, our body is not going to prioritize our spiritual abilities. Your clair abilities aren't going to matter because your body is just trying to survive or to heal. So if you're having moments where you're sick, you're unwell, it's not priority. Your body is going to use your resources to sustain and to survive. And that's always going to trump your spiritual playtime or any of the spiritual work that you want to do. And so there have been huge phases in my life where, yes, I'm a medium, but that doesn't mean I do it every single day. Because there have been times when it's just the body had other things to focus on. I had other lessons to learn. And so it kind of waxes and wanes. And so mediumship really is one of those things that is much more of a journey rather than a destination. And I'm still learning things about it on the journey. And here we are, 41 years in. I'm still learning new things. Happens a bit less often these days, but still. And you will too. I find I learn best through experience, and I think most of us do. Next, what is the difference between a medium and a channel? You know who a wonderful person would be to answer this question would be previous guest Monica Ramirez, who was inviting you to take her channeling class. She's a wonderful channel. When I met her, that was what she was doing most, was doing meditations and then also channeling them. Now, for me, a medium is going to focus on the loved ones in spirit, those who have passed, validating their life, whether evidentially or with spiritual tools, to bring forward a message or healing for someone who is living. And that is primarily the focus. Now, occasionally they may pick up a spirit guide. for me, a channel can be a lot more open. And so when you see people like Esther Hicks, for example, or who is Daryl, the one who channels Bashar, uh, those are channels. And so what you notice is most of them tend to be trance channels. They go so deep into theta that they allow the entity to come forward and to speak through them. It's not required as a channel. You could just bring through wonderful information from, it can get wild. There can be other star systems. There could be ETs, collectives, federations of the galactic variety that people allow to speak through them or to bring light language and channeling from to help us kind of grow as a civilization, I guess, of Earthlings. But it can also be spirit guides. It can be people from the past. There have been people who brought through Nikola Tesla talking about energy and systems and how things work. People can channel angels for messages, for healing. It's a little different. People can channel for the purpose of healing. They can channel for the purpose of making music, art. They can channel a consciousness. It's not always a loved one in spirit. And so I feel like that's where some of the differentiation will happen. A channel isn't likely going to ask for validation that you are familiar with who's coming through. Rather, it's just the signal that they're picking up on and allowing the message to come through. Kind of like they open the connection, the data comes through, they share it for what it is, they close it off, they let it go, they move on. A medium, they're going to share with you, but they're also going to make sure that this is your person, that you are in fact connecting. And so that's how I view those. But they do rely on a lot of similar abilities. So that's something to consider. I don't currently teach channeling in any form. Yeah, no, not really. I do teach people to access their records. And that is another place that you can work with mediumship. It just comes through differently. I also practice angelic mediumship. That also comes through differently. What you can learn is that we are radio stations and there are lots of different channels to connect to. I feel like evidential is kind of like tuning into the FM Easy Rock channel. When I work with angelic, for me, I feel like it's a little higher vibration, but it also feels a little different. I feel like the messages are still as clear. I still get good information. I don't feel as closely linked to the loved ones in spirit, so I feel a little more like I'm less likely to take anything on energetically. But the information's still clear, and then I have extra assistance if I need it. Or whereas just a spiritual medium who's maybe more open has possibly different guides that they work with. That was another question that came up the other day that someone asked in a conversation of what guides do I work with? A variety. It has changed over time. Initially, when I first began, I was a child and I did a whole lot of unconscious mediumship, and it wasn't a choice and it wasn't an awareness that I had. I do a lot of things unconsciously. I often learn the hard way. And so back then, I really didn't have a guide or anyone that I worked with. I didn't even know my angels, nonetheless, anything else. And so it really felt kind of scary and off-putting because I was encountering a lot of things just sort of on my own, the way that many children do. So I have a very soft place in my heart for childhood mediums because having been one, I know how challenging that can be to come through. And then later on, I did become aware of guides and angels around. The first ones that I became aware of without knowing their names was Archangel Metatron, Archangel Michael. Later on, I loved to work with certain goddesses. There were times in my life where I really looked up to Artemis. I really looked up to Athena, to Caradwen. Later on, I moved more into kind of a bit of like flavor of Hinduism and Buddhism. I enjoy messages from Sarasvati. I like to hear from Lakshmi. You can begin to open and explore. Now, while I don't seek it, sometimes Hecate shows up and has messages, particularly if I go into the Akashic records. She's more likely to come forward. And now galactic forces come forward, like the Galactic Federation. That was something that had occurred with for or to me, however you want to look at it. I'm not sure yet. That had something that had occurred immediately after I finished mastering Usui Reiki. And I think it was right before I began Karuna Reiki. I remember one day I had a dream about a huge spaceship being outside my window, and they were like cheering me on and celebrating. And then that day I found, like, when I woke up and crawled out of bed, I found like a weird little star sticker stuck to my skin. And it seemed like a weird coincidence that had occurred. But since then, when I do things in the Akashic Records, sometimes I can meet different collectives, whether it's the Arcturians, the Pleiadians, there's a variety. I can go in and encounter different ones. And so often Lyrans I'll get messages from as well. And I think I don't necessarily, I mean, aside from archangels, I don't necessarily prescribe one thing. Your journey is going to be very unique to you. And I think it's important to value that, to honor that, and to have some curiosity and some willingness to explore that, to play with it, to enjoy it. But that was it for the questions that I had received today. So hopefully this was enough for you to learn something and that you got to see both parts of the stream. I don't know what happened at some point. I guess I lost connection. But I will be loading these up to Spotify for you, and they should be available tomorrow on all of my streaming platforms. But that is it for tonight, and thanks so much for being here. Let me know if you have any other questions about mediumship, and I look forward to having Greg Nicholas on next week. You're going to very much enjoy him. I have already reached out to a couple of other local mediums for you to enjoy. And we'll see if I can get them on the podcast for you as well, so that you can know who's around. And if you're Ohio, you like them, you vibe with them, maybe you choose to go work with them, to learn from them, or to have a reading. But that is it for today, loved ones. All right, bright blessings, wishing you so much peace. And as always, stay inspired. Bye for now.